We'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody this morning to come hear the panel talk about their story of Mending Fences, how they talked about or settled their dispute, their reservation border dispute. But I wanted to introduce myself first. My name is Darrell O'Neill. I'm a chairman of the tribe, Northern Arapaho tribe. And I wanted to introduce Sergio Maldonado as a professor here. And he wanted to say some words before we get started.
Thank you very much to each and every one of you. This is a very important discussion, but nonetheless, it's a needed discussion. I certainly want to thank all of our guests from across the way. What a beautiful spring Wyoming day we have here. But you know, I work here at the Central Wyoming College. I'm the diversity coordinator, instructor of liberal arts. And first off, I want to say, outside, and it's open to the public, we have the St. Stephen's Buffalo High Teepee Project. It's a replica of the 1840 Arapaho teepee that is in the Smithsonian Museum, brain tan sinew sewn. It was a project of about 8 years. Feel free to go in there and take a look at it. I think it would be very good for this event. But I welcome you and I look forward to the discussions that will take place. And this is just wonderful. It's about bringing people together. And that notion of mending fences, it's not political, it's human. And I really thank all of you for your efforts, our guests, everybody, the mayors who are here, the ESBC, the ABC. We should be using acronyms. East Shoshone Business Council and the Northern Arapaho Business Council. Thank you very much. I want
to introduce the Northern Arapaho Business Council members. You guys, can you stand up? We have Ronald Loman, co-chair. We have Ron McElroy, council member. Dean Goggles, council member. And Willard Gould, council member. And also we have some members from Shoshone tribe, council members. We got Clint Wagon and Bob Herbert. And we also we have mediator here, Geoff. Moderator. Sorry. Geoff O'Gara.
I'll just second the welcome that you've already received from tribal leaders. I think it's we have to be grateful to these folks for volunteering their time and coming from Michigan to talk about their experience with a problem that is not identical, but it has some similarities to some of the issues that you're going to deal with here. I'll do a quick introduction, and just to give you an idea of how we'll conduct the meeting more generally, we'll listen to these folks tell the stories about what they went through and what they did for about an hour to about 10 o'clock. And then I'd like to open it up to members of the audience who particularly have questions for them. It's fine to state and discuss some of the problems that you're seeing or worrying about, and some of the issues that you think need to be addressed. But I think particularly we need to take advantage of the fact that we have these folks here from a long ways away, and they may have experiences and resolutions that they work towards that will be useful and helpful in looking at some of the things that matter to you. So some quick introductions. I'm going to sit down, which means I won't be able to see everybody. I'm just going to go down the table from my left and on down around the table. First, we have Ron Nelson. He is a member of the Tribal Council of the Saginaw Chippewa in Michigan. And again, he's a Wind River Reservation. So that's our first panel member. Next to him is Sean Reed. He is general counsel for the Saginaw Chippewa, and I think he's been for about a dozen years. And next to him, John Wernett. He's an attorney, was an assistant attorney general for the state of Michigan. He's now general counsel to the, I'll never pronounce this right,
Sault Ste. Marie.
Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewas. To his left, we have Sharon Tillman. She is now the mayor of Mount Pleasant, Michigan. She's a counselor and works in mediation and conflict resolution. I think has twice been mayor, once in 2008 and then currently. Is that correct?
1998.
1998. Okay. And then finally, we have Kathy Ling. She is a member of the Mount Pleasant City Commission, also a former mayor, and a teacher, has been a teacher, a high school teacher of social studies and English, and also taught at Central Wyoming University, where I believe Sharon also is.
Central Michigan.
Sorry. I wrote that down, so I got it wrong. Anyway, I think maybe the best way to start would be to have Ron talk a little bit about the reservation and the tribe, just to give us an introduction, and then we'll ask our friends at the far end of the table to also talk about Mount Pleasant and the community there, and then we'll go to Sean Reed to begin talking about what instigated the issue that they dealt with regarding boundaries and adjacent communities. Ron, if you wouldn't mind.
Good evening, all of you. As he spoke, I come from Michigan, and our original territory was 1/3. We actually owned 1/3 of the lower southern eastern side of the state before the state was even formed. Through treaty negotiations, we end up with being moved to the center of the state in Isabella, which consists of 6 townships and 128,000 acres of land now. Through different treaties, it's brought us to where we're at now, but to get where we're at, for our territory to be recognized, we had conflicts going on with local, state, city officials. And in order to get along with everyone, we had establish, basically a dozen MOUs in order to be where our tribe is today. The technical side, Sean can talk about.
And before we come to Sean and talk about that, we go down to Sharon and Kathy. If you'd like to talk a little bit about the non-Indian community, Mount Pleasant and surrounding area.
Well, Mount Pleasant is in the center of the Lower Peninsula in Michigan, right smack dab in the middle. It was originally formed with an economic base of farming and lumbering. And then as the years progressed, a university was established, so we're the home of Central Michigan University. The tribe has always been there. I will say that I'm a county, which means I'm from Mount Pleasant. I grew up there, and from my childhood, I remember that there was the res, that's the reservation. It was out east of town, and it was pretty poverty-stricken. Not pretty, it was very poverty-stricken. As the years have progressed with gaming, they've done, as far as I'm concerned, a fantastic job of turning life around. And it has become one of the largest gaming operations east of the Mississippi. We also had in our community one of the Indian schools from the late 1890s to the 1930s. It was a pretty large school where Native American children were taken from their homes, placed in the schools, and the federal government individual who was in charge of that kind of labeled it that save the man, kill the enemy, which meant that the school, besides providing training in domestic trades for women and young men, they were punished for any of the activities that reflected their culture, particularly their language and any of their ceremonies. And they were not really allowed that much time with their home families. The school was closed in the 1930s, but the scars are deep, they're long, they're long-standing. I don't want to talk too long, but I think that our community has had to grapple with a lot of diverse activity. We have the university, which is 19,000. Our community is 26,000. And then the tribal culture. And as far as melding those, it keeps the place lively, I will tell you. As far as the Indian school piece, our community did come together with the tribe some years back when there was a national movement called Journey for Forgiveness to address the ramifications of the Indian schools. And we marched with the Indians, the local elected officials took part in ceremonies, and those times of remembrances are still held at that Indian school. And local folks do participate. As far as the conflicts between city, tribe, county, whatever, I think the average citizen in our community was not aware of what was going on. And lawsuits were filed in 2007. We joined during that process when those lawsuits were being hammered back and forth. And at one point we were given the opportunity to come forward and work on a settlement. But again, it's a pretty diverse community. And what I've noted over the past few years is the appreciation on our local community's part of the richness that the Native American population brings to our community. And that's pretty ongoing. And I could speak to you of activities that take place now that would not have taken place in my youth. And it's been a benefit to us. And at any rate, we did come together and we hammered out the agreement here in 2010. And I guess you want to turn
I'm just going to go do the logistics of the government. How we relate to where the reservation is located, because the city of Mount Pleasant we're part of Isabella County. There's 16 townships in Isabella County. The reservation, originally, the historic reservation, was 5 whole townships and 2 half townships. And Mount Pleasant is in Union Township, and that was one of the half townships. And we were right in the middle. And therefore, the city of Mount Pleasant was half in the historic boundaries and half out of the historic boundaries. And that's why we became involved in the lawsuit.
So I'd like Sean was going to give us the chronology of how this developed and became a lawsuit. What instigated the initial issues and concerns?
Hello, everybody. As already been indicated, the current reservation consists of 5 and 2 half townships in Isabella County. It's depicted on the map that's over there. But as Councilman Nelson had indicated, prior to that, the tribe actually held the lower southeastern 1/3 of the state as its territory, ceded much of that territory, nearly all of it, through treaties prior to the creation of the state of Michigan. The current reservation now was established by the Treaty of 1855, Executive Order of 1855, and the Treaty of 1865. There had been a long-standing dispute with the tribe and the state of Michigan over the boundaries of the reservation. I won't go into a lot of detail about the dispute, other than to say that the state's position was that the boundaries that you see on that map did not exist. That instead, the tribe's reservation, if it existed at all, and they argued that, they also argued that it didn't exist at all, but if it existed at all, they said it only consisted of a patchwork of lands within those boundaries. So much, 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 much smaller area, according to the state's view, than what the tribe believed existed, was created by those treaties. So to describe that, now I can talk to you about some of the problems that created it for the tribe. The tribe generally has jurisdiction over its members within the confines of the reservation. So from the tribe's point of view, the tribe should have jurisdiction over its tribal membership within the 5 2.5 townships that are created by the treaties. The state, however, disagreed with that. So what happened was you had things going on, like the state was taking custody of Indian children that were within the confines of the reservation, but did not meet the state's parameters of what they thought the reservation was. So you could have a child in the reservation boundaries, but not on land the state considered reservation. In the child welfare case, being taken out of their home by the state and placed in a non-Indian family. That creates, of course, significant problems for the tribe, cultural being one of them. A legal problem because there's a federal statute called the Indian Child Welfare Act that wouldn't allow that to occur if that child was considered to be residing on reservation. So that was occurring. That was an ongoing battle for the tribe because its children then were being placed in homes that didn't believe was adequate, given the reservation boundaries. Other issues that precipitated it were criminal prosecutions. If a tribal member resides, generally it's the course of federal law, if a tribal member resides on an Indian reservation, the tribe has criminal jurisdiction over that tribe. There are some nuances to that, but that's as a general statement, the tribe would have criminal jurisdiction. Some instances where the feds would have jurisdiction. Very few, if any, instances where the state would have criminal jurisdiction over that tribe. Again, because of our dispute over the reservation boundaries, the state was taking criminal jurisdiction in the boundaries over tribal members and prosecuting those tribal members in state court. In fact, we had some cases where the same crime or occurrence, the same member, was being prosecuted both in the tribe's court and in the state's court. So that created all kinds of problems and conflicts with the tribe and the state of Michigan. And what was happening also in relation to that was, so you'd have a tribal member who was being brought into the state court proceedings under criminal prosecution for an occurrence that occurred on the reservation boundaries. And some tribal members were fighting it in state court. And they were making the claim that the tribe wasn't a party to those cases, it was just a criminal defendant in the state. But the tribe would get an attorney and the tribe would argue, I don't belong in state court. You have to judge, you have to throw the case out, and if I'm going to be prosecuted, it's got to be in the tribe's court. So those cases were being heard. There was a case, the Bennett case in 1998, was one of the first ones I'm aware of, that went up to the Court of Appeals, the Michigan Court of Appeals. The Michigan Court of Appeals ruled basically in favor of the state and said, no, it's a patchwork. So that now created precedent that the state was using to establish its own criminal jurisdiction, but which the tribe disagreed with. The tribe wasn't a party to the state case. We had no way of getting into the state case to argue it. And it wouldn't be the right proceeding for us to do that anyway, for a lot of different reasons. So we were sort of getting hamstrung, where the state now was saying, well, look, we know we can do this because our state court says we can. So that was a case in '98. We had subsequent cases, one that was in around 2003 to 2004, similar situation, similar facts. Tribal member gets prosecuted for on-reservation activities in state court, gets an attorney, fights it, goes up to the Court of Appeals again, says, nope, the state's right, you're wrong, and it's a patchwork. So what the tribe was faced with, given the way those cases were going up in the state court system, given the fact that the tribe could not conceivably participate in that, because it was in the state court system, it was a criminal proceeding. What we were, sort of the dilemma that the tribe was facing was that eventually one of these cases is going to get to the state Supreme Court. And that's going to muddy the waters even further. So when you talk about what precipitated the tribe's action, so this is one of the key factors that did, was the fact that we had cases going up where we were getting rulings from the state court in opposite of the tribe's position, against the reservation boundaries, affecting tribal members, the state removing children from their homes. Another issue was the state government was assessing or collecting state income taxes from tribal members who both worked and resided on the reservation. As a matter of federal law, they can't do that. If a tribal member both works and his income, his or her income is derived from reservation work on reservation, then that income is not subject to state income tax. Because of the dispute again, the state was assessing those income taxes on tribal members. It became a huge problem because tribal members were saying, well, look, we're on the reservation, you can't do this. Some of them were refusing to pay the tax, I believe rightly so. Refusing to pay the tax, but at their own peril. So what was happening was the state was coming in, they were garnishing bank accounts. I'm talking tens of thousands of dollars from tribal members, and they were extracting that money from those tribal members. Even though the tribal member believed that they shouldn't have any right to those funds. So those are just some of the issues that we were encountering. There were others, environmental issues that we were having. So what the tribal council in 2005 decided to do was, they were sort of confronted with all of this. It was kind of coming to a head because of the cases going up in the appellate court system for the state, and they decided to litigate it. So the tribe brought a lawsuit in federal court requesting the federal judge, requesting declaratory action, injunction, against the state, as you will, or declaratory action, declaring basically that these are the reservation boundaries established by the treaties of 1855 and 1864, and requiring then the state to recognize those boundaries. That's sort of how it all precipitated.
John, if you would put on your former state hat and talk a little bit about the state's perspective and their involvement in this.
All right. So from the perspective of the state, there were a number of things going on. So the treaty that established the reservation had language that set aside all of the unsold lands in these townships and partial townships. And the tribe's view on this was, and always has been, that set up a traditional bounded reservation. The state and its experts understood that language as reserving the lands for sale, provided for allotment to individual tribal members, and then the unallotted lands went back into the general land office. And so the state's understanding of it was that it did create a reservation at all, that the tribal organization was to be dissolved, but was later reestablished under the Indian Reorganization Act. We had very different views of the legal significance of the language in the treaty. In the background of all of this, beginning in the, I'd say the mid-90s, through around 2000, we had a very conservative Republican governor in the state who was very pragmatic, I think, when it came to tribal issues. He was the one that agreed to sit down and negotiate the gaming compacts with the tribes. And near the end of his administration had set up a tribal state accord that had resulted in increased dialogue between the governor's office and the tribe. And then that continued beginning in 2000 with the new governor, who was a Democrat. And we set up regular ongoing meetings, monthly meetings, where we talked with the tribes. And this problem with the Saginaw Chippewa tribe was a real thorn. The fact that the governments couldn't agree on where the reservation boundary was created immense discord between the state and the tribe, and between the locals and the tribes. And I think the perspective of the state at the time was that actually it was more important to get that issue resolved one way or the other than it was necessarily to win it. That the uncertainty and all of the tension and the infighting and the discord that flowed from that uncertainty was doing a lot more damage than the underlying issue itself would.
We actually had a prior case over this. There was a case in the mid-90s, I believe it was, where the Saginaw Chippewa tribe purchased a piece of property from a private non-Indian landowner outside of the city of Mount Pleasant in, I think it was Union Township. The township began to assess property taxes on it. The tribe took the position that it was inside the reservation and should be exempt. And a lawsuit resulted from that, and I think the federal government, did the federal government intervene in that one? I believe they did. Yeah, they did. And we litigated that case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Much to the frustration of the tribe and the state, the court ended up deciding the case on other grounds. And you know, I don't know if the tribe felt the same way, Ron, but both sides had spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on expert witnesses with the primary objective of resolving the disagreement over the reservation boundary. And in the end, the state won the case, but on completely unrelated grounds. The court said, I find it unnecessary to reach the question of the boundary. And we all shook our heads because that was really what the case was about. So it lay fallow for a number of years. I had left the Attorney General's office by that point. I had moved over and was working as the governor's liaison with the tribes as her advisor on tribal issues when I learned that the tribe had filed the suit. And I can tell you that the state actually welcomed the lawsuit at that point because the tribe was immune from suit. The state had no way to bring the lawsuit against the tribe. And it was a way of teeing the issue up, getting it resolved for better or for worse. And so it was not the thermonuclear option from the state's perspective. The fact that the lawsuit was filed we thought was a good thing. But I have to say, on the front end of the lawsuit, I think everybody on both sides, as far as I could tell, viewed it as an all or nothing proposition. That I can speak for the governor. The notion was that, all right, this is a good thing. We will bring our expert witnesses in. We'll have our trial, and the court will make a decision. And it'll probably be appealed, but in the end, we'll have an answer to this question. And we'll know where the reservation boundary is. We'll know if it's a large reservation or a small piecemeal one. And I think from the state's perspective at that time, we had negotiated enough agreements with the tribes and had developed a good enough working relationship with the tribes that there was a high level of confidence on the state side at least that if we could resolve this dispute about the jurisdictional boundary, we would find a way to sort out some of the other disputes and issues. We've been doing that with most of the other tribes at the time.
I want to go down to the far end to Kathy Ling now and ask you to talk about the perspective from a small town that seemed to be caught between two rather large entities fighting over things that would affect your lives.
Yes, as John and I pointed out, the suit initially was between the Saginaw Chippewa tribe and the state. It didn't involve the local government, but we were aware of the fact that the consequences of the suit, depending on which way it went, definitely would have the impact on the local government. So I think the suit was filed in 2005, and by the time I got elected to the board in November of 2007, so it went on in 2008, and it was at the end of 2007 that both the city and the county made the decision to get involved on the side of the state in order to try to protect the interests of the city and the county when there was a decision was made. I think that both the county and the city were concerned about the same issues that I've read that this local community is concerned about. We were concerned about how can you say that the city, half the city, is part of the reservation? What is that going to do to the way in which we deal with law enforcement? What's that going to do with the way in which we deal with zoning issues, with revenue issues, and other code enforcement issues? I mean, it was just a real practical concern. What is this going to mean? And I think that most of us had always thought of, I mean, we weren't experts on what did the treaty say, what was the Treaty of 1855, what was the Treaty of 1864. I think as John indicated, most of us just thought of the reservation. When I moved to Mount Pleasant in the 1970s, I was told the reservation is east of town. The reservation is in the area in Chippewa Township, and where most of the tribal members live. And I never thought of the reservation really as being anything other than that area.
I'll bring the microphone a little
Oh,
closer.
sure. Yeah. Sorry about that. And just from my limited perspective, when I heard that the tribe was talking about reestablishing the original historical boundaries that would have included the 5 full townships and the 2 half townships, I really didn't think there was any basis for that. My initial reaction was, well, that was true in 1855, 1864, but that was just for that period of time, and I didn't really understand why the tribe was even attempting to say, this is the reservation. And so it was a real education for me to be involved in it. I mean, I'm a government and social studies teacher, and I'm a researcher, and I did a lot of reading. I read the Treaty of 1855, I read the Treaty of 1864, I went to the preliminary hearings in the trial, and listened to both sides and listened to the arguments. And as I listened to the arguments, my conclusion was, what is an argument on both sides of this? You know, I can see this issue, I can see this issue. I took notes, I found the notes the other day, where it was a note to the city manager saying, well, I didn't know the name of the female attorney that was representing the tribe, but I said, boy, she is good. And I thought our attorney had done a good job, and the attorney for the federal government. The county attorney, nobody's from the county is here, so I can say, my husband's on the county board, and I've said that to him. The county attorney, was really good. And the state attorney, I mean, one of the things, John indicated that the governor's office just wanted it resolved. Do you think it would be fair to say, John, that the Attorney General's office didn't necessarily feel the same way about that? Because they had the attorney in court during the trial. Their attorney was the one that was presenting the issue in court. And as we went through the mediation, it was unclear exactly where the Attorney General was coming from.
I want to be a little careful here.
Yeah.
The politics were difficult within the state. In Michigan, the Attorney General is an independently elected, statewide elected official. And so at this time, when the lawsuit was filed, we had a governor who was I'd say probably most would describe her as a relatively liberal Democrat, although she was a former prosecutor. And we had an Attorney General who was a conservative Republican, and they did not get along. They simply did not get along. The Attorney General had a propensity to file lawsuits against the government. You can imagine that made the relationship difficult. And as a consequence, I think the governor early on in the lawsuit made a studied effort to kind of stay back and stay out of it because we didn't want to contaminate the process. The other thing that happened was this all occurred at a time in Michigan when Michigan was going, like many states at the time, was going through a really severe economic crisis. And you've heard the stories that Michigan, because of the auto industry, went into recession early, and it was sooner, deeper, and harder. These were tough times in Michigan. State revenues were falling off. And so in the Attorney General's office, there had been substantial staff reductions. The Native American Affairs Division that I had headed up when I was there had been abandoned. All of those folks were gone, and all of these responsibilities had been assigned to the Natural Resources Division, which I think some would suggest wasn't really fully adequately prepared to handle it. So that was kind of an issue.
I'm going to ask Sharon and Ron to describe at two opposite ends of this issue and this question. What were the fears, maybe not fully informed fears, but what were the concerns in your community and then in your community about where this might lead if you did not come out the winner, shall we say, in the court action?
Well, I can remember the first time that I heard that the Native Americans in our county wanted half my town. Essentially, Mount Pleasant is bisected by High Street. And as I understood it at the time, if they were to redraw those reservation boundaries, anything north of High Street would be reservation or Indian country. And initially in the negotiations, it was called Indian country. I had no idea what that meant. And that land, that north of High Street, included my home. And I had not a clue what that would mean. And at first, to be honest with you, I thought that kind of claim was pretty outrageous. I mean, I had lived there all my life, my parents had, and then all of a sudden we were going to be part of Indian country. And it was frightening. I was telling my colleagues here that I will never forget the night I came home from work and there were 3 tribal police cars across the street. And I didn't know what was going on, but here are 3 tribal police cars. And my first reaction was, what are they doing in my neighborhood? And where are my police? Well, as it turned out, it was part of the time when our local law enforcement was trying to work out jurisdictional issues over tribal and non-tribal members. But I didn't know it at the time. And what they were there for was a domestic dispute involving some Native Americans. They had no interest in me. They had no interest in coming into my yard. But I didn't know. And so these were some of the things that those of us who heard Indian country, north of High, that included, again, half our town. Now, what did that mean for me? Was I going to have, tribal police just coming into my neighborhood? And it took a while. It took a lot of talking. It took a lot of educating for me, my neighbors, my family, to come to understand the tribe was not interested in jurisdiction over me or non-Indians. They're interested in jurisdiction over their tribal members and what they perceived. That's what they were looking for, was jurisdiction over what they thought was just due for them. Some of the other fears had to do with code enforcement. If a Native American buys a home next to me, are they going to have the same standards that we have in my neighborhood? Can they trash the neighborhood? What am I going to do? Are they going to have to abide by our zoning? Can they buy a place in my residential neighborhood and put in a bar? I mean, there were the things that would come to anyone, I think, if you thought that the laws, the regulations, the ways of conducting business were somehow going to be blown out of the water if those jurisdictional boundaries were withdrawn. And it generated a lot of fear. I know I felt it, and I'm a mediator. I'm a pretty peaceable person. And I didn't have anything against the tribe, but I wanted to know, what did Indian country mean for me? What did that mean for me, my property values? I know, and there was a lot of talk back and forth as far as, I remember one commissioner said, well, if they want it, they can have it, but let's shut off the water. Remember that?
Well, it was in terms of the fire department. Okay, if the tribal fire department wants to come into the middle of the city,
They can bring the water.
but we're not going to let them hook up to the firefighter.
I mean, well, and we weren't serious with that, but I mean, that was part of the discussions that took place as far as if all the rules went out the window, what are we left with? And so this was where, I guess the benefit of pushing us, the way the judge did and the mediator, to sit down and say, okay, what are you talking about? What is it that you want? What protections can we have? What protections can you have? And that's when I learned that, that tribal members were not exactly all that happy. We have 5 police agencies in our community. We have the state, we have the Sheriff's Department, the city police, tribal police, and Central Michigan University police. And those people on the reservation were not real happy with kind of willy-nilly police enforcement folks coming in and out of their reservation.
One of the things that I wanted to, I actually have some questions for the audience. And the first one is, how many people in the audience here from Riverton know, or at this time realize, that the Northern Arapaho tribe signed an agreement with the city of Riverton in which they adopted our entire master plan, zoning, and boundaries? Does anybody realize that they actually have signed such a document and accepted it? Can we have a show of hands? Okay. And so what that means is that we've really taken the first step that was taken in Mount Pleasant to put this behind us. Who all in this room realizes that the Northern Arapaho tribe signed an easement for the city that allowed them to have a right-of-way probably from me about to the edge of the street out there? As you go along Werewolf Road there, Cooper Road, to cross tribal land. That's maybe, it can't be 200 feet. And that they signed that easement that allowed us to take our water line out of the water plant so that it can go to the Job Corps and to the east, so that eventually Mr. Urbikite's pet project, it's a wonderful project of completely looping the city of Riverton with a water line for protection, can be completed. And to do that, we have to cross another huge tract of tribal property, and that they signed that for no money, with the right to have a few taps after they withdrew the memorandums of agreement because of public opposition to them. How many people knew that in the room? How many people in the room know that the Northern Arapaho tribe came to the city and asked us to have our building inspectors inspect the casino as it was being built, and to pay them for doing that, pay the city for doing that, to make sure that it was built properly and according to code? How many people here knew that? And I can go on like this for quite some period of time, but the idea I'm trying to pass on is that these efforts were taken because of a long mediation process that Governor Sullivan was in charge of for us, and it allowed us to take these kinds of steps. So the last question I have is, in Wyoming, we were required to keep the mediation process private while it was going on. In other words, we didn't mediate in full of a room full of people like this. How was that handled with you guys?
I can address that, I guess. This process, and I've been involved in probably a half a dozen of these kinds of mediations between the state of Michigan and one or more tribes. And invariably, a critical element of the negotiation is that it is conducted behind closed doors. You cannot negotiate sensitive, difficult agreements in a fishbowl. And part of that is that if you're going to get anywhere in the negotiation, in my experience, you're going to invest a huge amount of time and energy on the front end, just getting past all of the preconceptions, the hostilities, the anger, resentments that have built up sometimes for a century and a half. And it can be a difficult and painful process. And there is no alternative but to go through that process patiently, respectfully, to listen to the other side, and over time begin to build some element of trust that lets you start talking about what the real issues are. And that's how we get to agreements. You know, you start out on the front end and it looks like it's only about reservation boundary, but in the end, it turns out that that is fraught with a whole range of issues. And the settlement discussion becomes very wide-ranging. It's almost impossible to do that sort of thing in public. You cannot negotiate difficult deals in public. Now, the flip side of that is that in order for the agreement to work, and I don't care if it's reservation boundary or tax or Indian child welfare or treaty fishing rights, in order for it to work in the long run, there has to be public buy-in on both the tribal side and the non-Indian side. And so this process of rolling it out and trying to make sure that the public is comfortable with it and that they accept it is really critical. And that's sort of the flip side of, yes, you have to do it with a high degree of confidentiality. And we had some concerns coming here, as a matter of fact, that while the agreement is done, it's been in place for a long time, there was a very strict confidentiality agreement imposed that everybody signed that was enforced by the court. It was a critical part of this process. People had to have the confidence that they could say things honestly and openly and not have them repeated out in public. And you know, frankly, at the front end of the process, some people said some pretty foolish things. You know, people said things that I suspect we all said things that we wished we hadn't later on when we got to know one another and understood issues better.
Thank you.
The court was so strict on confidentiality, and the judge made it clear you cannot repeat anything to anyone. But at one point, the city was negotiating for themselves. The county wasn't involved in it. The city was going to do something that I knew the county would not be very happy with, and I couldn't say anything to my husband, who was on the county commission, because of the confidentiality. So it was that was a very strictly enforced by them.
Can I get a show of hands of people who have questions they want to ask? I want to get just a count so we can kind of figure out how much time we're going to go here. Okay, good. I'm going to go here and then Sarah.
Yeah, I worked in the environmental field for about 5 years, specifically in the Clean Air Act with EPA and the tribes. Also worked extensively with the state and regional area of the Clean Air Act. And one of the questions I had regarding the environment is, has there been an agreement, or did any of the negotiations come about as to how the state, the tribes, and the city work together with environmental issues? For example, water quality, air quality, those types of things. Because it seems like there's going to be some issues with regards to clean water, clean air, and also with sewage, with garbage, with those types of issues. How did you guys come to an agreement on this?
Well, a lot of environmental issues were a part of the MOU that we had done, where they weren't subject to the mediation, in that they weren't discussed. We ended up with a final agreement and the mediation process on those. But we had an agreement where we would sit down and try with state folks and begin discussions on those. So that's still an ongoing process. What I can tell you, though, is a couple things. One is there was some concern about, you didn't raise this, but it's sort of an environmental thing, hunting and fishing. So, you know, I think from the state's perspective, what's that going to mean with the recognition of the boundaries as Indian country for hunting and fishing rights for tribal members or Native Americans. So one of the things we did subsequent to the mediation to address that issue was the tribe adopted a hunting and fishing ordinance. And it provides clear parameters for tribal member hunting and fishing rights. And what we did when we were drafting that is, you know, I sent, in fact, drafts of our ordinance to the Michigan representatives so they could review them before it was passed. They commented on them. They had an opportunity to do that. So we sort of just worked through that process that way. At the end of the day, we ended up adopting an ordinance that both sides could live with, and that's tribal law today. The other issue that we've had is the permitting of a tribe's wastewater treatment facility. Given the fact that it's Indian country, EPA has taken the position, and I believe always has taken the position, that the EPA, the federal government's a regulatory body, so they set the effluent standards for that facility. That
Without saying too much, it hasn't been a subject of any agreements to date. So I know that was a concern of the state of Michigan. Maybe John can speak to some of that, but as to how that's being governed, it's currently governed by the EPA. Those effluent standards are governed by the EPA. Other than that, the specific other environmental concerns we just haven't gotten yet.
They were outside the agreement. I do recall that at one point the Saginaw Chippewa tribe has a separate reservation over on Saginaw Bay at Saginaw. And I recall that we worked cooperatively to try to get state law amended, was it? So in order to allow the local unit of government to enter into a government-to-government agreement with the tribe over the water line there, to share the water line. That's true. But there's one other point I'd like to make. One other point I'd like to make in connection with the environmental issue. There was another similarity between what you all are going through here in Michigan. In that back in the late 90s, there was a Class 1 air designation and treatment as a state case in northern Wisconsin involving the Forest County Potawatomi tribe. And the state of Wisconsin and the state of Michigan both challenged the findings in that case and tried to prevent it. And I can tell you that on the state end, the state people were just scared to death that this was going to have a dramatic impact economically on an area of the state that was severely depressed, high unemployment. This is the far western upper peninsula of Michigan. It's sparsely populated. It was an area that the main industry, other than timber, was mining, and most of the mines had closed. Economic development was a huge issue. And so there was intense fear over what this would mean if a small Indian tribe in northeastern Wisconsin had the ability to affect these choices and decisions. So there was litigation over this over time, and eventually it went to mediation, and the state of Michigan, in its wisdom, decided not to participate in the mediation. And the net result of all of this is that the tribe reached an agreement with the state of Wisconsin under which the radius will be 10 miles instead of 50 on the Wisconsin side. But because Michigan didn't participate, the radius extends 50 miles out. So my point there is, whether it's environmental issues or other issues, my view is it's always worth your time to come to the table and talk. You don't have to reach an agreement. You can talk for 18 months as we did, and we almost walked away at the end saying, well, we tried. So there's nothing that compels you to reach an agreement. But if you don't sit down and talk, you will miss opportunities for creative solutions.
And that's one comment I wanted to make, is I want to thank you guys for coming here and sharing with us your story. Second, I want to recognize a couple of people. One is Rosa Salamanca from the U.S. Department of Justice. Also want to thank Sergio Maldonado for bringing everybody together. And thirdly, I want to make a statement with regards to federal agencies and federal governments. What they require, first and foremost, I think, is mediation. And if mediation doesn't work, then you go to lawsuits. But I think this mediation thing, and I want to thank the tribes for recommending and requesting that you guys come here so that we can begin this dialogue and this mediation process. And in the end, we all know the lawsuits cost us money, and the only ones that get rich on that are lawyers. So thank you all for coming here.
Sadly enough, the EPA is not here to answer questions. They're in disguise somewhere. Sarah, please.
I'm Sarah Robinson. I'm actually the Eastern Shoshone Tribal Liaison to government. And I guess I just want to make a statement, and I think it's important as you come and talk to these communities that you understand that there are two tribes here. And I thank Mr. Vincent for sharing that information, but as they talk about what the Northern Arapaho tribe did and agreements they made with the city of Riverton, I mean, technically, because land is owned jointly here and not by one tribe or the other tribe, that any agreements made without both tribes' consent is basically an illegal agreement, and it's just really null and void because they don't have that power on their own. to do that. Prior to any treaty being in place here, this was the home of the Eastern Shoshone and those other tribes. And it was over a period of time then that the Northern Arapaho then were given that ability to be here as landowners. And so our issues are almost double what just one tribe has to face. And part of that has to do with, in Wyoming, because we are contact with federal government and with non-Indian people came very late in the process versus your tribes who are more East Coast and East in the eastern states had that contact with non-Indians. We have always felt, because we're not an IRA tribe, we are a treaty tribe and are governed by resolutions, but have always tried to come to the table. And one of the issues that now my job as a liaison is with not only just the state government, but the federal government, is a whole issue regarding consultation. Because we here, I have felt just, and I've only been in there a year and a half, is that we've not been consulted. And so when we look at all of the issues regarding the natural resources we own, land boundaries, infrastructure, all of that stuff in our relationship with the county and the state of Wyoming is not good. Because we've never been asked to come to the table, and once now that we are pushing back, then we see where that has led us. And the state of Wyoming, for that reason, actually has not done well in the courts. Because when the Northern Arapaho, when they chose not to negotiate gaming, the Northern Arapahos came forward with their suit that allows them now to have a casino where the state is not involved in that. And I mean, it's just that type of relationship and a whole lot of work that needs to be done by everybody in this room. And most importantly, the private citizens, but I should want to thank you ladies for sharing the fact that everyone needs to become educated about the law, about the treaties, about what the language is about, so that the statements that we make as individuals, especially here right now, aren't as ignorant and racial as they have been, because that doesn't do anything for us. But I want to thank you for being here.
My name is Darwin Sanctuary Jr., Chairman of the Eastern Shoshone Tribe. And first of all, I'd like to welcome you all to the Long Valley and to the Wind River Indian Reservation. And thank you for coming out and sharing your struggles and your issues that you obviously are working on and overcoming many and still working on a few. And that's a positive thing. And one of the things we have come across when this initially happened was that there was a lot of the other issues that people were bringing up, and they were scared, and this was everybody was gonna run amok, and people were gonna be let out of the jails, and we were going back to the Wild West, which we're proud to be a part of, but we're hoping that it wasn't going to be that wild. Secondly, I would like to apologize for not being here earlier. I know Chairman O'Neill had asked me to be here, and I want to apologize to everyone and all the other tribal leaders. My daughter booked me to sing for her second grade class today. And they read a book about jingle dress dancing, and she wanted to dance and do that, so I had to go support my daughter. And that was at 8:30, and I thought it was just for her class, and I found out it was for the whole second grade, so it took a little longer than I expected. And so it was, although it was a good thing to support our youth. But I would like to recognize, I don't know if this happened earlier, to recognize all the councilmen. Yes. And also I'd like to recognize one of our Shoshone elders, Mr. Starweed, who's I'd like to thank him for being here as well. He's one of our oldest tribal members on the Eastern Shoshone tribe. Now, as far as issues that are going on, what I really hope is that you are able to share, maybe, and I'm not sure what the continuing forum is, but if you all could share how you continue to progress with these issues. And as we said, that we do have a little bit of a double issue in that we deal with two tribes here on the Wind River Reservation, with the Eastern Shoshone being the treaty tribe and the Arapaho's coming in later. But we have worked together as a joint tribal council for quite a few years, and we're continuing to do that. And we are trying to deal with, the city of Riverton, the county, the state. We brought up some issues about taxation, jurisdiction, and all the issues that currently that have been out in the press has been everything but the boundary issue. And as you said earlier, Mr. Reed, that actually all those other things come with that, I guess, is my understanding. But I hope that there's citizens, private citizens here from the city of Riverton and the local communities. I did see the mayor here somewhere. Hello, Mayor. And we are trying to work together, and perhaps you may be able to share a little bit about how you brought all these entities together, these different governments, the tribes, the state in, and what was kind of the marketing tool, if you will, or something that brought you all together to start saying we need to solve this problem. And we need to solve these issues so that we can have a win-win situation. And I really appreciate the comments by Ms. Tillman and Ms. Ling as far as some of those fears that people have. And we're trying to arise above those fears and trying to make things a better place for everybody here. And we as the tribes, we look at the reservation as a whole. And what we do, it does have an effect on everyone. And that when we come together as a joint tribes to meet, we are dealing with everything, the exterior boundaries of our reservation and everything that resides within there, and all the people. And it's been probably been a little bit of misinformation that we're only worried about our own people. Well, we are worried about our own people, but also we're worried about our neighbors as well as our relationships that we have with these people. And so we're really hoping that. And I'm very glad that you were willing to come out here and share this, because we're really hoping that there is a win-win situation. And we may not all agree. However, it's within the best interest of everyone. And I think that with what you have done has definitely given us another opportunity to say, look, there's other ways to deal with this. Besides going through litigation, besides name calling, besides fear mongering. That we can come to a resolution, and I think what you all did, and I know there was probably a lot of struggles and lost nights of sleep. However, I think where you're at now is a much better place than where you started. And I hope that everyone can gain something from this today. And I'd like to thank Sergio. I know Sergio's around here somewhere. I'd like to thank him and all the people that brought this together, brought us all together to hear what you had to say and share with us. And I appreciate that.
Do you want to add anything to the question of what brought you to the negotiating table? We talked earlier about mediation and court. Any additions to that? Please.
Well, I know that, when we discussed it originally, it sounds as though we were kind of all kicking and screaming for the negotiating table. And I think however, that as it progressed, that did afford us that forum to come together and talk. And some of that talking was heated, some of it was emotional, but heated emotional stuff is sometimes very real, and that's when the truth comes out. And you know, I think I kind of got ahead of myself in my initial comments when I kind of jumped ahead to what the community is like now as opposed to when I was younger, which is, well, 6 decades plus a bunch of years. And I think, you know, I think maybe it might frustrate some of the attorneys because I digress from the, you know, this paragraph and this statement and this you know, legal phraseology. Because what I'm seeing, being a resident of our community, is the spin-offs from coming together. And I mentioned that earlier on, and you said, what did we do? Well, we got there, we talked, and I think part of that was that we learned how to appreciate each other. You know, we've still got a ways to go. But you know, that trust and that communication, if you don't communicate, you can't trust. And if you can't trust, you don't communicate very well. And what I've noted in our community is as we've progressed along, with that framework in place, that for the non-native community, a growing appreciation for the native community. And you know, I could cite example after example. We had National Day of Prayer last week, and our chief, Steve Pigo, was the individual that was there that led this multi-jurisdictional congregation in prayer. And he sang an Anishinaabe song, and you know, it was moving. You know, we have people in our community now that know what smudging is. You know, we all can say bonjour, and we can say miigwech, and that's about the extent of my Anishinaabe, but I mean, but you know, that kind of appreciation, and then maybe some of that educating as far as, you know, what our local tribe went through. You know, yes, you've got your individual identities, and you've got your individual struggles, but, you know, to come to an appreciation and maybe hear some things we didn't want to hear, you know, on both sides, you know, except me, you know, and it's an idea, too, of acceptance, you know, and to get to know the people as individuals, not just that lump of people, that stereotype, you know, but to learn your neighbors, put yourself out to do that. And I don't want it to seem like I'm getting into a preachy stance, but that's what it's about. It's about relationships. And you start building on those, and you find that you've got some good stuff. And when I initially said it's enriched our community, it is enriching our community. And I would like to think that we are helping to enrich the Native American community. We did have an opportunity a while back because they now own the Indian school that used to be there, and they came to us and said, look, we know you've gotten some grants for, you know, historical grants or, you know, brownfield grants, that kind of thing. They came to us and met with us to ask how we did that, to get those monies, so we can share that kind of stuff back and forth. So again, I maybe sound like I'm on my soapbox, but I suppose that's the mediator in me, but the good place to put your energy and build on that. You know, I'd encourage you to look at that and go forward. I would hate to think what our community would look like if we decided to litigate. It wouldn't be as rich as it is today.
We can do 1 or 2 more questions, and then I want to give you all a chance, if you'd like, to mingle with our guests and get a chance to talk one-on-one. Star Lee is in the background, and they have a word to say. Star?
Yeah, I'm Star Weed, Morning Star Weed, and I'm a Shoshone tribal member, and I'm 96 years old, and I've been told by my great-grandpa, Chief Washington, wherever there's meetings to be held, be there. That's the reason I'm sitting here. And It's been 164 years ago since he signed a treaty with our government. 1863 treaty, Shoshone Nation, and 1868, the treaty over here. Now, that's how long it's been since just the Shoshones went up and signed the treaty, and that's to make a home for the Shoshone people, so they'd be comfortable, and so I see now the accumulation of the people that the treaty brought here when he made the treaty around Thermopolis too. He made the treaty by calling Warm Valley. There was no such names as states. There were no states. He called it Warm Valley and signed the treaty. And that's what I want to say when he signed the treaty. And then he built Fort Washakie up there, up at Fort Washakie Agency. But that was one time a military base. And that's where he made the Homesteaders Act. And the soldiers all got homes out here, out in this territory over there. And so after that, he took his regalia off and joined the army. And he had that Fort Washakie, that's his army base, and it's named after him. That's why it's Fort Washakie. Used to be an army base there. His army base. He became a captain. And so he always got along with the American people in a good way. And he made the reservation, made the boundary lines. He made the boundary line over here where there's log owls, Owl Creek Mountain. And he always said, be careful with them birds. They bring you all kind of news. All different kinds. That's the kind of bird he is, that owl. He will tell you something that's going to happen. That's the reason his name is Owl Creek Mountain. That's where our line is now. And now we're talking about boundary lines. That's a big territory there where we bought them lands back with the Army signed up for. We bought them all back and signed back to our tribes. And we have oil wells over there. And that's our daily resources. You know, we get per capita payments, all that. And it's a rich territory. And I don't want to give all that up. I was just wondering what boundary lines, how big we're talking about for Riverton. And things like that are come to. I hear you're going to have a meeting So I come down. He told me I'll always be there. That's the reason I'm here. Now you're to talk about boundary lines now. We're at. Got it. Where's the boundary lines for Riverton you're talking about? How big is it? And I hear you talk about boundary lines. And we've got along this far. We're all working together, but what's the questions?
Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask Daryl to take over the meeting again here. We're going to have a mingling now where you can all talk individually, but before we do.
Okay, I'd like to thank Star for his comments and also Chairman Sinclair for his comment. But before we close, I wanted to say I got ahead of myself when we first started the meeting, but I wanted to ask Pat to say a closing prayer. Thank you.
I'll stand right here and say a closing prayer for this gathering. I want to thank the chairman for asking me to do that in our native way. We're called on to pray. We don't refuse the person asking us, and we pray for what they ask us to do. So if you'll think along with me, I'll do that. Take a good day to that and that, and that day of Jesus, and that. Huna Sadina, he said, and Father Creator, Huna Sadina, for this good day, spring day today, I ask you to bless this gathering and all those that attended from near and far. As we return to our homes at the end of the day, that you will guide us and give us safe passage back to our homes and our families. The springtime that is upon us now, we ask for blessings for our families and our homes, all our loved ones, wherever they may be. Grandfather, bless our places of our workplaces and our schools where our children attend. Bless this valley we call the Wind River Valley, that our people, friends and neighbors, tribes, and all of our friends in the local towns will be able to find solutions, come together and live together. Amen.
Let's give a round of applause, please, to this panel. It's always